We are starting in a brand new, fresh book for math, fourth grade, and for our first lesson, we're beginning Module 4. Today's lesson is only going to be one page of notes, so we're only going to be using page 1. Today's lesson is called Module 4, Lesson 1, Geometry Vocabulary. Our entire unit is about geometry and shapes, but before we can dive into it, we need to know all about the vocabulary words behind these lessons. When you're ready, make sure that you have your table of contents labeled and flip to your first page of your new book. Our objective today is that we can identify key terms with geometry. Not only will we be able to define them, we're also going to be able to draw them and label them like a mathematician would. The first word that we're going to be learning about is endpoint. Endpoint's definition says, a point at which a blank will blank. A point in which a line will end. That makes sense, doesn't it? When you have a line, you know that it's marked by its ending by an end point, a point that marks an end. Let's draw what an endpoint would look like. A point is like a dot, but when we draw a point, we don't just want to speck our pencil down because that's hard to see. We want to fill it in like we're making a chocolate chip. Endpoints have labels, and usually in geometry, we use letters like A, B, C, D, all the way to Z to label points. So I'm going to call this point A. When you see an endpoint labeled in instructions or when you see it written in writing, you're just going to see the words point and whatever letter is being used to label that endpoint. So this would be called point A. We can use points to start building different types of lines. And in our brain, there's only one type of line that we've known of so far. But in fact, when it comes to geometry, there's many different types of lines. Lines that go on forever, lines that end, line that ends on one side but goes on forever on the other side, when two lines come together. And so we're going to go into the details about what each of these different lines are. The first is a line segment. And that's pretty much the line that you're used to drawing most times. A line segment has two endpoints. It ends on both sides. You can have an endpoint here, an endpoint there, and the two connect together. A line segment can run up and down, side to side, diagonal, as long as it ends on both sides with two endpoints. Remember that endpoints are labeled. That way we can tell the difference. So let's call this endpoint A, and we'll call this point B. When we label lines, line segments, and rays, which are different types of lines we'll be drawing today, we're really specific about the labels. So let me show you how to label a line segment. We begin by writing the two letters of the endpoints that mark the beginning and end of the line. So this is line segment AB. But you could also have line AB and ray AB. So we need to make sure that we draw a mark that shows whoever's looking at this that this is a line segment, something that starts and ends with two endpoints. And we do that by drawing a line across the top of the two letters that begin and end. This label represents line segment AB. So if a line segment ends, how is that different than a line? A line blanks in both directions without a blank. A line extends, meaning that it stretches in both directions without an end. When we draw a line, we still begin with endpoints. So again, let's call this A, and let's call this B. But instead of the line ending at the B and beginning at the A, it's going to extend past it, traveling through the two endpoints. Our definition says that this line is supposed to extend in both directions without an end. So really, it's supposed to go on forever. Now, it's not realistic for me to sit here and draw a line that goes on forever. So mathematicians have created a label to show when you have a line that extends forever, and that's an arrow. If you see an arrow at an end, that means that direction extends forever. Because this is a line, that means that it's going to extend in both directions, not just in the direction of A, but also in the direction of B. The line's going to extend past both forever without an end. So now let's label it. Our two endpoints are still A and B, so we need to be specific about what we put on top of those letters to mark that this is a line instead of a line segment. For a line segment, we need to show that it starts and ends. But for a line, we want to show that it goes on forever. So just like we did in our drawing, when we label it, we're going to add two arrowheads to the sides of the label. That lets us know that this is a line that extends in both directions. So we have a line that ends in both directions, a line that extends in both directions, but what about something in between? Let's talk about a ray. A ray has one blank and goes on in the other direction without blank. A ray has one endpoint and goes on in the other direction without end. So it's like taking a little bit of both of these lines together. Again, let's get our endpoints A, B. I'm going to mark B as my endpoint and extend it past to A. With our label, it's going to look very different than these two. I did something on purpose so we can demonstrate how to label a ray. When we marked our lines and our line segments for A, B, it didn't really matter the order in which we put the letters because there really wasn't a place where it officially started and ended. With a ray, the letter or the endpoint that it starts on is the endpoint that doesn't extend on. So for our ray, that begins at letter B. Then we write the letter that shows the ray extending on. And that would be letter A. You start with your endpoint, then you label your line that goes on forever. Now for the symbol on top, we're going to show that extension through an arrow like this. One side ends, and that's going to be on top of the letter that has the endpoint. One side extends, and that's going to be on top of the letter that extends. So this is ray B-A. Now that we've talked about endpoints that build lines, that can create line segments, and rays, let's talk about an angle. Any blank line segments or rays that share the same endpoint. Any two line segments or rays that share the same endpoint. I'm also going to add something else to this definition as well. Any two line segments, rays, or even lines that extend on together can create an angle. So I'm going to include a little caret in my definition and write the word lines, comma, line segments, comma, or rays, now that I'm naming 3 things in a list. An angle is when we take the sharing endpoint of 2 of one of these different lines. So let's say we have point A. We also have point B. And with it, let's build a line segment. Now let's introduce a new point. We're going to call it point C, and I'm going to put point C right here. Point C is actually going to connect with point B, and we're going to build a ray that extends past point C. Now we have 2 different lines, a line segment and a ray, connecting at the same endpoint, which is point B. The shared space between these 2 lines shared at point B is called an angle, and we mark it with a curve like that. I'm even going to point an arrow at it to say that this right here is an angle. When we label an angle, we use a symbol that looks like the opening of a crocodile mouth, like this. Then we label the 3 letters, 1, 2, 3, that form that angle. But the order of the letters is important. We start at the end, go to the middle, end at the end. It can go in both directions. We could call this CBA, or we could call it ABC, but it's important that that center letter has to be the shared endpoint, which is B. So I'm going to call this angle ABC. These are going to be important words to know as we move through our geometry unit, so we also have some movements to help you memorize these as well. But these are your notes. Good luck on your problem set.